Thanks, guys. Great to be here. So, yeah, it turns out that California and the government schools, they call them there, are not very good at teaching kids math. In fact, less than 1/3 of the kids in California actually even meet the dumbed down California math standards. So they have a new plan. Apparently, math is racist. And so now they're going to make it less racist by doing less math. You think I'm kidding, but I'm not. True story. They're planning to make math less about math and more about diversity and left-wing ideology. So as California's children get progressively dumber and dumber and dumber, as measured on their own dumbed-down academic testing and standards, well, they just adopted a new woke mathematics framework that quite ironically is being criticized by experts all across the political spectrum. So this new math scheme is, they openly tell you it's designed to promote social justice and equity and all these kinds of things. But again, it radically de-emphasizes actual math, which you'd think would be the point of doing math, but apparently not. A lot of experts have actually warned, again, quite ironically, that this is going to hurt minorities and poor people the most. Of course, poor people especially, since they can't afford to supplement their government education with a tutor or extra resources, but they're moving ahead anyway. They also say they want to have more women and minorities in STEM, and so that's what science, technology, engineering, and math. So this is a great way to make sure that it doesn't happen. But anyways, that's what they're doing now. The State Board of Education president, Linda Darling Hammond, who happens to be a radical left-wing activist and a known associate of the communist terrorist Bill Ayers. Yes, that Bill Ayers, the guy who bombed the Pentagon, bombed the State Department, bombed the Capitol back when they didn't really care about insurrections and targeting the Capitol. That guy, the guy who launched Barack Obama's political career in his living room in Chicago. Yeah, that terrorist. Working with communist Cuban intelligence. Yep, that terrorist. The terrorist who, according to the FBI guy who infiltrated them, Larry Grathwohl, was planning to exterminate about 25 million Americans once they had the revolution and they invited the Chi-Coms and the Soviets in. Yeah, that guy. So Linda Darling Hammond, she is now an educator, apparently. And here's what she says. This framework provides strategies to challenge, engage, and support all students in deep and relevant math learning by building on successful approaches used in nations that produce high and equitable achievement in math. Okay. She says it also draws on the experiences of educators who have worked for a decade to develop successful strategies for teaching California's rigorous standards, carrying those lessons to others across the state. And she says, this framework provides teachers and schools with a path to greater excellence with greater equity. And that's interesting. It's very interesting that they put this lady in charge of the state's indoctrination programs because she actually had an opportunity to try out her quackery. She was given charge of the Stanford New Schools. Yeah, and that worked really well. They were actually in the lowest achieving 5% of all the schools in California, which is quite ironically a state filled with schools where kids cannot read, cannot write. They can tell you all the latest gender stuff. They can tell you about climate change and equity, but they can't actually read their high school diplomas. So imagine being in the bottom 5% of that. And then imagine being rewarded with the spot as president of the state school board, and then you get a sense of what's going on in the land of fruits and nuts, better known as California. So again, they openly tell you this program is to promote social justice. Of course, that's a term used by Marxists and totalitarians to sanitize the ideas they're pushing, which of course have resulted in hundreds of millions of government murders around the world and countless other horrors, billions of people enslaved. But don't worry, it'll be different this time, right? It always is. They're always one execution away from utopia. And again, the framework actually tells you that its goal is to teach towards social justice. Here's from the 1,000-page document. They say, cultural and personal relevance is important for learning and also for creating mathematical communities that reflect California's diversity. Educators can learn to notice, utilize, and value students' identities, assets, and cultural resources to support learning for all students. And so if you're confused by that word salad, yeah, me too. They go on to say in this document, additionally, because culture and language can be intertwined, adding to cultural relevance may also enable teachers to attend to linguistic diversity, a key feature of California and relevant to the teaching and learning of mathematics. Interesting. Now, California, like I said, is a disaster when it comes to education. They spend more than almost any other state per pupil, and yet less than 1/3 of the students meet the state's own dumbed-down math standards. Millions of California victims of public schools cannot even read. In fact, they got sued over it. And yet, under this new framework, students will now wait until high school to do algebra, which means almost none of them will be doing calculus before they graduate. I'm sure that'll be great for California. Now, Republicans have criticized this. Republican State Senator Scott Wilk, he's on the Senate Education Committee. He says math concepts can be difficult to grasp, but there's nothing wrong with meeting kids where they are. But woke math is not the answer. He said if California wants to be a STEM leader, it needs to keep high standards and prove to minority students and students in underserved communities that they have the power within them to master those standards. Now, we actually warned about this back in November of 2021. You had 1,000 experts and mathematicians telling the state that this was basically bat poop crazy. They said they were building a mathless, brave new world on a foundation of unsound ideology. And so they proceeded to go ahead and do it anyway. And by the way, this is the same State Board of Education that just a couple years ago voted to mandate an ethnic studies model curriculum that had elementary school children chant to the demon gods of the Aztecs of cannibalism and human sacrifice. It's also the same state where government schools have repeatedly been exposed, trying to normalize not just the gender bending, but also even pedophilia and child rape. So ultimately, folks, meddling with the math standards in California is like polishing the brass handles on the Titanic. It's at best a total waste of time. If you love your kids, get them out of the state's indoctrination centers. And yeah, it's the only way they're going to get an actual education. Thankfully, it's becoming easier and easier as millions of families flee. Thanks, guys.